Dear netizens, to be honest, lately the things Donald Trump has been doing really worry me. Some people call me a leftist, but maybe you don't understand. Whether you're left or right, that's not the point. First of all, as I've said before, and I'll say it again, I'm not. I'm a supporter of the Ronald Reagan wing of the Republican Party. I admire Ronald Reagan the most because he brought down the Soviet Union, he cut taxes, promoted a free economy, and rolled back regulations. He made a tremendous contribution to the vitality of the American economy. But I want to tell everyone, whether you're on the left or the right, there's one thing you absolutely can't change. Even if we have conflicting opinions, there's still a hat that everyone has to wear. And what is that hat? It's that you have to uphold the framework of democracy, because that framework is what guarantees human rights and the spirit of science. Without these two things, there is no modern civilization. So, how should I put this? The so-called framework of democracy is made up of three main elements. One is human rights, one is the rule of law, and one is freedom of speech. If you fail to uphold any one of these, then it's no longer democracy. It becomes an authoritarian government, or even a totalitarian government. You might think that a totalitarian government is actually better than a democratic society, especially since democracy can be really messy. A lot of people actually believe this, and it's a viewpoint that's more common than you might expect, even if it seems counterintuitive. That's not the important part, but you really do need to know where you stand on this issue. Once you break that framework, like, for example, when someone says, Donald Trump was elected with votes, so why can your courts rule against him or remove him from office? I'll answer your question. Donald Trump's election came with a condition. No one ever said the condition could be overturned, which is that he must rule under the Constitution. He immediately swore an oath of allegiance to the Constitution, a very solemn oath. So, what exactly is the Constitution? No, the president can't just say, the Constitution means this or that. If the president says, the Constitution means this and that, then there's no Constitution because he's not interpreting it, so that means there's no Constitution at all. So, it's up to a third party to interpret it. In a common law society, it's the courts that interpret the Constitution. Even if he's elected president and has these policy proposals, those proposals can't go beyond the fundamental rules set by the Constitution. For example, if he says that people born in the United States aren't citizens, that's clearly a violation of the Constitution. Because the Constitution is written very clearly, everyone born in the United States has citizenship. It doesn't say anything about whether their parents are American or not. It's everyone born in the U.S. So, Donald Trump can't just ignore that. If you think you can just disregard the Constitution or the law, then of course, that leads to situations like what's happening now with Harvard University, which I'll talk about in a moment. He also wants to go after other universities, and all of this is an attack on freedom of speech and academic freedom. If you think none of this matters at all, and the only thing that matters is achieving your goal, then what does that mean? It means there can't be any DEI, no DEI allowed, no progressive ideas allowed. It's about not allowing these things, about kicking out undocumented immigrants, kicking out those undocumented and new immigrants, and whether we should impose even stricter laws to deal with all illegal individuals. But this involves spending a lot of money to build many prisons and hire a lot of police officers. It really does. Right now, to deport undocumented immigrants, Donald Trump is planning to spend over $46 billion in the coming year to deport these undocumented immigrants. He plans to hire 10,000 more immigration officers. This is a very expensive undertaking, Actually, it costs even more than the benefits those undocumented immigrants are said to receive. But anyway, that's not the main point. What I want to talk about today is a book I read, which I want to share with you all. It's called The Culture of Freedom. The main point of the whole book is essentially to tell you that using a relatively democratic system to protect human freedom is actually something that happened by chance, rather than by any kind of predetermined plan. That's why not every culture has developed into a democracy. It's not something that was bound to happen or guaranteed. It came about because of a series of coincidences and unexpected events. So, when I see this, I can't help but wonder, why didn't democracy emerge in China? Isn't that the question? Why didn't democracy emerge in China? You're not really asking why China didn't develop capitalism. What you should be asking is why China didn't develop a scientific spirit. You should be asking why these things emerged in the West. Because ever since I was young, I've read Arnold Toynbee's studies on history. Throughout history, out of more than 20 civilizations, no one invented democracy. No one invented the market economy or capitalism. No one invented the scientific spirit either. So, these are all the result of chance factors. And what are these chance factors? Why did Greece develop this democratic spirit? First of all, if Greece hadn't been such a large area divided into city-states. If it had been a big country, because it would have been easier to govern, it definitely would have moved towards centralized power. Greece didn't have centralized power because it was made up of seas and mountains. It was a vast area. So you couldn't just go and conquer others. If you did, and then station troops to guard them, it would have been far too costly. So in every area, each one became its own city-state. For example, Athens was the largest, with tens of thousands, even up to 100,000 citizens. This was the biggest. The smaller city-states only had 20 or 30,000 people. This made it easier for democracy to develop because the terrain was fragmented and hard to control. Back then, after the Peloponnesian War, Sparta defeated Athens, and then sent 30 people who admired Sparta to govern Athens, a total of 30 people. But they were quickly killed by the Athenians because they just couldn't manage the place. Sparta couldn't keep a large army stationed there for long, so Athens soon resumed collecting some taxes because after killing those 30 people, they regained the ability to make their own choices. The fragmentation of this place, and the Athenians have this really strange spirit. I honestly don't understand why there are people like that. One thing this book mentions is the Athenians' pursuit of freedom. They felt that after going through several times, of course, sometimes by chance, like when the emperor died heroically, these people thought that with no emperor for the time being, it would turn into rule by the nobility. Some people then felt that rule by the nobility didn't seem very fair, so a few of them carried out several democratic reforms, introducing things like the assembly, where decisions were made by the whole citizen body. Of course, that democracy wasn't perfect. It didn't include slaves or women, but all citizens had equal rights. They had a certain spirit, a spirit that made them believe that no one should be someone else's servant. As long as you were an Athenian citizen, you were meant to take control of your own destiny and shouldn't have to submit to anyone else. Matters decided by the city-state were the responsibility of its people. Political comes from the affairs of the polis. So politics is the city-state, public affairs. Like Sun Yat-sen explained, the people's affairs in political consultation. Politics is the business of the city-state, meaning public affairs. With this kind of spirit, you'll find that the seeds of what we now call modern knowledge all come from the Greeks, philosophy, mathematics, those famous aesthetic proportions, and music as well. The Greeks, as a people, were constantly pondering and reflecting on the relationship between people and fate, you know. That's exactly why there are those famous tragedies. Are people really, truly under the shadow of fate, or is there something more to it? Is it possible for every object to reach its most beautiful form? Can you keep breaking things down into smaller parts? Only the Greeks would think about these things. If you keep breaking things down until you can't anymore, does it become an atom? Chinese people have never really thought about this question. They only considered, for example, if you have a ruler and you take half of it every day, could you keep doing that forever, endlessly, without ever running out? They believed you could keep dividing it, but at least they thought about the problem. The meaning of life, the origins of physics, the origins of matter, medicine, all of these roots come from Greece. Later on, Rome inherited some of it, but as this book says, this is from a major German historian, so what happened in the end? In the end, Rome turned into an empire. It became ruled by an emperor. After the fall of Rome, the traditions of democracy and science were completely broken off. It wasn't until the Renaissance that Greek books were brought back by the Arabs and the Abbasid Caliphate. People started reading Greek texts again, which led to the Renaissance and then to the Reformation. Yes, this. The emergence of rationality brought about the Reformation, and then, and only then, did modern civilization emerge. When we talk about European history, modern civilization is rooted in Greek culture. This shows how fragile Greece and Rome were. Is this the best system? Where is it best? Easy to find and diverse. It enables individual freedom, sparking a knowledge explosion, the foundation of modern knowledge. But then, for over 1,000 years, it disappeared. It wasn't until, quite unexpectedly, under these random circumstances, that a second wave of democracy emerged in Britain and America. Then there was another very diversified culture, and for several decades there was a great leap forward in civilization. This was all thanks to inclusiveness and diversity. Without inclusiveness and diversity, in an authoritarian society, the progress of civilization is bound to be slow because there's not enough diversity. There will still be progress, but it will always be slow. For example, in China, after thousands of years, the spirit of science never really developed, and that's why. Today, democracy is extremely fragile. Freedom and democracy go against human nature. That's what this book is talking about. Because, you see, each of us, when we read this book, has a kind of natural tendency to worship. We often feel like there's some mysterious, unseen force in the world, some much greater power, and we're naturally inclined to engage in a kind of religious worship. This religious worship could be Catholicism, Islam, Confucianism, or even communism or nationalism, or something else entirely. Once you start believing in these things, your rationality will be completely lost, without exception. So even if you have democracy, as soon as hatred or nationalism arises from these beliefs, democratic and free thought will be extinguished, inevitably. Is it possible that the freedom and democracy we enjoy today are just a historical accident, and that, in the end, the flame of the civilization will once again be snuffed out? That's what this book is about.